Lady Whistledown here, and I pen this with frost still clinging to my window pane. They say the Duke of Fallowbrook's heart is carved from winter itself, unyielding, untouched, unbroken. Yet in the courtyard, where snow softened every sound, a lady fell to her knees and whispered, "Spare us, your grace." Society has not taken a full breath since. Mercy was granted, but mercy always demands its price. And so I ask, what will the cold Duke claim in return? If you're enjoying the story already, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what happens. Truly, you will want to stay for what comes next. And tell me, where are you watching from? I love seeing our little world gather together. London prides itself on knowing its dukes. Allow me to confess that it knows very little of the Duke of Fallowbrook. They speak of Oliver as though he were carved from the marble pillars of his ancestral hall, unbending, untouchable, unfeeling. Yet marble cracks, my listeners. The Tun forgets this at its leisure. Allow me to peel away the frost. Years ago, though not so many that time has erased the sting, Oliver gave his heart to a lady whose smile could coax roses to bloom before spring. London adored the match. Society declared it perfect. A future duchess of charm, wit, and enviable lineage. But charm may cloak cruelty, and wit may edge into scorn. She did not love him. Not truly. She loved the power of being adored. And when she realized his devotion was unwavering, she traded it for a more glittering title elsewhere. Ah, my listeners, is it not astonishing how the heart can be shattered not by the blade, but by a whisper? A whispered farewell, delivered without tears, courtesy, or regret. He returned from that humiliation changed, no, transformed. Where once there had been warmth, there was now winter. Where there had been trust, walls now rose as high as the ramparts of Fallowbrook itself. His voice grew cool, his gaze sharper. He learned to rule not with affection, but with precision. Those who come before him now meet not a man, but a fortress. And thus London named him the Cold Duke. Yet no fortress stands without fear behind it. Only the foolish mistake silence for strength and distance for peace. But before you pity him, let us look to the other figure in this quiet drama. For Oliver is not the only soul who has tasted abandonment. Helena, yes, the very same Helena, whose name lingers now in the hush of supper tables and the corners of drawing-room gossip, bears no title, no wealth, and no whisper of scandal to buoy her name upward. She is eldest daughter to a once modest but respectable family, whose fortunes have waned like autumn light. Do not be deceived by her gentleness. Strength is not always loud. In the small manner of her late father, now threadbare but kept spotless through sheer pride, Helena rises before dawn. She walks the frost-slick fields with the steward, though he is old and his hands tremble. She manages accounts though the ink in the ledger grows thin. She teaches her younger siblings to smile, though childhood has not been kind to them. She calms her mother when grief returns as sudden weather does in the countryside. If love is a burden, Helena carries it willingly. There are those in society who would dismiss her as plain. And yet one finds oneself watching her twice, thrice, so subtle is her presence. She has the kind of face one remembers without knowing why. The sort of quiet eyes that do not demand attention, but invite honesty. In another world, had England rewarded gentleness instead of boasting, she might have been the most sought-after bride of the season. But this is not that world, and so our Helena, dutiful and steady, shoulders the weight of all who depend upon her, without complaint, without rest, without recognition. She and the Duke have not yet collided in the light of scandal, but I ask you to look closely now. For though their lives are different as silk and wool, they share something that binds them more tightly than circumstance: loneliness. Oliver, surrounded by grandeur, sits in rooms large enough to echo his silence back at him. Whole wings of his manor stand empty, not from lack of funds but from lack of laughter. He speaks when required. He smiles only in memory. Those who serve him do so with fear, not fondness. Helena, surrounded by love, has no one to share her burden. She is the steady pillar in a household of fragile spirits. Her grief is never spoken of, for she has no luxury to indulge it. And at night, when the house sleeps, she sits quietly with her thoughts, knowing no one will ever worry for her as she worries for others. Yes, they are opposites, but of the same solitude. One made cold by heartbreak, one made weary by devotion, one feared, one overlooked, and London, oh sweet London, pretends not to see either. How curious that a society which prides itself on observation misses the most human truths entirely. But I see them. I see Oliver standing at his tall windows, the snow outside reflecting in his eyes like the ghost of a life he no longer believes he may have. I see Helena carefully re-hemming garments so her siblings will not know they have grown too quickly for their clothes. I see two hearts beating quietly in different corners of England, never expecting that their next breath will belong to one another. No, there is no meeting yet, no exchanged glances, no touch of gloved hands, only the slow gathering of fate, a duke who has forgotten warmth, a woman who carries warmth so well she does not realize it shines, and soon, very soon, circumstance shall drag one toward the other, not by love, not by desire, but by necessity. For when Helena rises from her small writing desk, ink drying on the plea she must send, her hand trembles. Not from fear, but from the knowledge that once she sets the words free, her life will no longer be her own. And when Oliver breaks the seal upon that letter, his expression will not change. But something inside him will, a ripple across ice, a quiet shift of snow, the first sign of thaw. Remember their loneliness now, my listeners, for soon, oh so very soon, these two hearts shall collide. My quill poised above parchment, for certain journeys do not begin with fanfare, nor music, nor any of the glittering trappings the tongue so deeply adores. Some begin in silence, cold, persistent, and heavy as winter fog. Such was the morning Helena of Briarwood Manor wrapped her worn cloak about her shoulders and began her passage toward Fallowbrook. The road was long, the frost perilous, and the sky pale as washed ink. One could say it was merely the weather of the season, but I have long observed how destiny favours dramatic staging. And what greater stage than a countryside path leading a gentle-hearted woman toward the heart of a frozen empire? Her family did not know she left. Her siblings slept in tangled warmth under thin quilts, believing their sister merely rose early to tend to accounts as she always had. Her mother rested in the next room, breath shallow, held together by memory and Helena's endless efforts to preserve what little dignity remained to their name. If they knew Helena's purpose that morning, they would have wept, out of fear and love and the cruel understanding that she alone held their crumbling world upright. But Helena did not weep. She walked, one step, then another, the quiet determination of a woman who refuses to surrender those who depend on her. The road curved, dipped, and then at last rose toward the estate known in whisper and rumour alike, Fallowbrook Manor. I have seen grand houses aplenty, yet none so severe. Its stone towers rose like watchmen against the sky. Its windows reflected no warmth, only the grey light of morning. The manor loomed, beautiful, imposing, unapologetically distant, as though it wished to discourage affection even before one crossed its threshold. How fitting, given the man who ruled it. Helena's boots left faint marks in the frost-dusted gravel as she approached the great doors. They opened not through invitation, but through the efficient obedience of a servant who regarded her with disinterest. She was led through polished halls where no laughter had echoed for years. Portraits lined the walls, stern-faced ancestry, gazes cool enough to chill the sun, and then the study. The door opened. She entered. Oliver, Duke of Fallowbrook, stood before the tall windows, his back to her. Morning light traced the edges of him like a sculptor's knife. His posture was straight, controlled, distant by intention rather than habit. One could almost imagine that he feared, should he relax even slightly, he might shatter. He turned, and Helena's breath caught, not at his beauty, though he possessed that in refined measure, but at the stillness in his eyes. A stillness not of peace, but of absence. She curtsied, though not deeply, not boldly either, simply enough to acknowledge difference without surrendering dignity. "Your Grace," she began, her voice steady through sheer will, "I have come to speak regarding the tax levied upon Briarwood Manor. My family cannot meet the amount by winter's end. I beg, time. A season's grace, nothing more." He regarded her without expression. "You ask relief from a debt owed," he said, tone smooth as ice across a lake's surface. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that children will starve if the estate is seized," Helena answered. "On the grounds that those who work the fields have given their lives to that land and deserve not to be cast out. On the grounds that—" "On the grounds of sentiment," he interrupted. She did not look away. "On the grounds of mercy." Ah, that word, the very one the Tun swears Oliver no longer recognises. The room seemed to tighten around the moment. Oliver's gaze did not soften, but something flickered, something too quick to define, yet impossible to miss. "There will be no extensions on debts," he said at last. Helena's heart stilled. "But," he continued, stepping forward with the slow, measured grace of a man accustomed to control, "there may be exchange." She felt the shift in the air, not threat, not impropriety, something far more unnerving, negotiation. "My sister," he said, and for the first time his voice carried something fragile beneath its restraint. "Lady Clarion. She has spoken no word in nearly 2 years. She refuses company. Physicians have failed. Tutors have failed. Companions have fled in despair. But I am told you possess gentleness." The word did not sound like praise. It sounded like something dangerous. "If you come to Fallowbrook to serve as her companion," Oliver said, "the debt of Briarwood Manor will be forgiven. No threat, no coercion. Just a bargain that rewrites futures." Helena's breath was neither steady nor broken, simply suspended. Her mind raced, recalling every face she loved, every room she fought to keep from collapse, every burden carried alone. She did not long for grand society or wealth. She longed for nothing more than the safety of those who depended on her. And yet, to live here? In these cold halls? Under the gaze of a man who had seemingly banished warmth from his very blood. "I ask one thing," she said quietly. "Will your sister be treated with patience?" His eyes locked to hers, unflinching. "She is the only person in this house who has ever known my heart." A confession disguised as austerity. And that, my astute observers, is when Helena understood she was not bargaining with a monster. She was bargaining with a man still bleeding beneath armour. Her answer came not from courage nor fear, but necessity. "I accept." 3 words. Yet the world shifted. The ink on ledgers waited to be crossed out. The hearth of Briarwood would continue to burn. The workers would continue to harvest their fields. Children would not go hungry, and Helena's life would no longer belong solely to herself. The Duke inclined his head, sealing the pact not with ceremony, but with acknowledgement. She would stay, not as guest, not as servant, as companion to the girl whose silence haunted these halls. The manor doors closed behind Helena that evening, and the village would soon whisper of her absence. But the Tun, the Tun has yet to learn that this single step across the Duke's threshold marked the beginning of a scandal they will feast upon for seasons to come. Fates, once parallel, now entwined. Helena did not linger long in her departure. After accepting the Duke's condition, she returned to Briarwood only long enough to gather her belongings and press gentle assurances into the small hands of her younger siblings. She spoke softly to her mother, a promise that her absence was temporary, that she would return, and that their home would remain theirs. There were no dramatic farewells, no weeping at the gate, only determined composure from a woman who has never allowed herself the luxury of despair. And so, cloak wrapped tight and jaw set with purpose, she crossed once more into the cold halls of Fallowbrook Manor. Life there did not welcome her with warmth. The corridors were wide enough to swallow sound. Portraits watched her with knowing severity. The grand staircases rose like stone rivers leading to chambers where silence had made its home. It was not a place meant for softness, yet Helena carried her softness anyway, as though it were armour rather than vulnerability. Servants observed her with careful glances, curiosity wrapped in caution. They had seen companions before. They had also seen them fail. Oliver did not greet her personally upon her return. He sent word instead, delivered by a footman whose expression suggested he, too, understood the gravity of bargains made in silence. The Duke would see her later. For now, she was to be shown to her quarters and then brought to his sister, Lady Clarion. Lady Clarion's rooms were tucked away in the western wing, where the sunlight fell softly through tall windows. The young lady sat by the fire when Helena entered, her fingers curled around the hem of her gown, pulling the threads as though unravelling fabric could unravel memory. Her hair fell loosely down her back, uncombed yet delicate. She did not turn to look when the door opened. Helena did not speak at first. She simply sat. Not close but not far, a presence without intrusion. Minutes passed like snow settling quietly on windowsills. Then, with movements slow and gentle, Helena placed a book on the small table between them. A simple story, nothing grand, chosen not to impress, but to comfort. Lady Clarion's gaze flickered. A beginning. The days unfolded like this, slow, delicate, almost fragile. Helena did not coax conversation nor demand acknowledgement. She hummed very softly as she brushed Clarion's hair. She read aloud when the silence felt heavy, her voice a warm ribbon threading through the room. She accompanied Clarion to the garden, though the girl did not speak or gesture, merely walked beside her, their steps matching without design. And Oliver watched. Not openly, of course. The Duke of Fallowbrook does not linger in doorways or hover in corridors like a restless boy seeking attention. But more than once, Helena felt the subtle shift of air that suggested someone had been present only moments before she turned. More than once, she sensed eyes on her, observing, measuring, questioning. Their paths crossed most often in hallways. A glance, a nod, a silence filled with things unsaid. Oliver spoke rarely, and when he did, his words were chosen with unerring precision. "You are patient with her," he remarked one evening when they met near the grand staircase. Helena inclined her head. "She deserves patience." The Duke's expression did not change, but something softened, barely visible like snow melting on stone at first thaw. "She has not responded to anyone in 2 years," he said. "Then it may take 2 years more," Helena replied, and continued on her way, leaving him standing amidst the echo of her conviction. He should have dismissed her words. He did not. It would be pleasant to say that Helena and Oliver's moments were sweet, but sweetness is not often how affection begins. Their nearness held tension, quiet, sharp-edged, unspoken. He was a man accustomed to control. She was a woman accustomed to endurance. They recognized something familiar in each other, though neither would dare name it. There were times when their conversations sharpened. "You should not wander the grounds alone," he said one mist-grey afternoon when he found her near the hedgerow. "The paths are uneven." Helena met his gaze evenly. "I am capable of walking without supervision." His jaw tightened. "That is not what I meant." "Then you may say what you mean." The silence between them was not cold, nor hostile, simply charged. And beneath that charge something human breathed. Even so, the servants noticed the shift long before either of them acknowledged it. One cannot hide the quiet turning of a heart as easily as one hides a secret. A gardener paused in his pruning as Helena and Oliver walked past in deliberate silence. A maid's gaze lingered longer than necessary when Helena entered a room. Whispers sparked and spread, like kindling kissed by flame. Helena warmed Clarion's heart. Yes, But she was warming Oliver's too, entirely without intention. One evening, as Helena read by the fire in Clarion's room, the young lady's fingers reached, slowly, uncertainly, and grasped Helena's sleeve. No words, only contact. But it was more than had been given in 2 years. Helena's eyes stung with quiet triumph. Clarion did not look away. Oliver entered at that exact moment. He stopped. The world seemed to still around him. His gaze dropped to Clarion's hand upon Helena's arm. His breath, just once, faltered. Helena looked up at him. The moment stretched and broke. He nodded once, the smallest gesture, but waited as an oath. Then he stepped back, closing the door silently behind him. He did not trust himself to speak. Whispers grew louder in the manor after that. Servants spoke of change, of warmth, of danger. For nothing is more dangerous in a house of silence than a heart learning to beat again. And so I must ask, would you guard your honour or follow your heart? Scandal does not always bloom in ballrooms. Sometimes it grows in the quiet of a study, beneath the faint scent of ink and ledger paper. It began when Helena, in her quiet diligence, sought to understand the workings of the estate she had bound herself to. She believed, with earnest loyalty, that if she was to remain within Fallowbrook, she ought to understand the structure of the debt that had forced her hand. A simple desire to know how deep the obligations ran became the thread that, once pulled, revealed seams far more frayed than even she imagined. Her fingertips traced the careful columns of numbers in the manor's accounts, numbers arranged with precision too precise, as though crafted rather than recorded. And that is where suspicion found her, silent, unwelcome, impossible to ignore. She did not confront suspicion with accusation. Helena was not a woman prone to rash judgment or emotional speculation. Instead, she requested access to older ledgers stored in the manor's records room, claiming she wished to better understand prior harvest yields. No one questioned her. After all, who would suspect a companion of the lady of the house to search for anything more? The room was dim, dust settling on the leather bindings of decades-old volumes. She worked for hours, candle burning low, fingers moving carefully down columns that told the story of seasons past. Yet when she compared these quiet years to the present accounts, the truth glared like a lantern held to glass. The increased taxes had not been the natural adjustment of estate necessity. They had been altered, intentionally, consistently, and systematically. The handwriting was the same, the ink tone uniform, the steward's neat script, unmistakable for she knew his handwriting. Most would have fled with the knowledge, or collapsed beneath its cruel implication. Helena only sat, still as winter, the candlelight trembling across her brow. The debt had never been issued by the Duke, the threat to her family's home, the fear that had driven her into these walls, the sacrifice she had carried like a secret weight. It had been born not of cold nobility, but of cold greed. The steward, trusted and long-standing, had manufactured the crisis to line his own pockets, and Oliver, stern and distant, had been ignorant of it. The world's tale of him had been incomplete, and she, who had come to him as supplicant, had misjudged a man wounded by the past. Helena did not rush to him. She spent the night in silence, gathering not courage but composure. There are truths that must be delivered with care, not in fire. When morning broke, pale and thin through the long windows of the east corridor, she carried the ledgers to the Duke's study. Oliver stood at his desk when she entered, posture as precise as ever. Yet he stilled when he saw her expression. Not fear, not reverence, something far more disarming, certainty. Without requesting invitation, she placed the ledgers before him, one atop the other, open to pages where the figures aligned too conveniently. Her voice held no accusation as she explained, step by measured step, the pattern she had found. She did not embellish nor sway the truth. She let the numbers condemn themselves. Oliver turned each ledger page slowly, the way one approaches letters from the dead. His face remained controlled but not unreadable. Shock did not seize him. Rather, understanding settled in like shadow stretching across floorboards. The steward had been with his family for decades, Trust rooted that deeply does not snap cleanly. It tears. And when realization struck fully, it was not rage that consumed Oliver. It was regret. He looked at Helena then, truly looked, and recognized the weight of what she had borne. The debt he believed law and duty had been a falsehood. The sacrifice she had made had been unnecessary. He had wronged her without intention, yet the harm was no less real for being unintended. Helena expected apology, perhaps dismissal, perhaps distance. But what she received instead was silence so full it threatened to unmake her composure. For in that silence lived the understanding of two hearts opened without permission. He did not speak of gratitude. She did not speak of forgiveness. Words would have been too small for what passed between them. Her gaze held his, steady, unwavering, with the quiet revelation that he was not cruel, only wounded. And his gaze answered that she was not merely dutiful, but extraordinary in her strength. There were no confessions, no declarations, only a closeness impossible to disguise. Their breaths were nearly shared, their hands almost moved. Almost. For affection born in such a moment is delicate, too new to name. They stood suspended, bound by truth, undone by it. Helena saw not the cold Duke of Rumour, but the man striving to hold together the shattered remnants of trust. Oliver saw not a debtor, nor servant, nor companion, but the woman who had brought light into a house long resigned to darkness. Neither spoke of love. Yet the air between them carried it, unspoken, undeniable, waiting. And so the ledger remained open on the desk, numbers exposed, ink unwavering in its testimony. The steward would be confronted, justice would come. But that is another part of this tale. This moment belonged to revelation, to recognition, to the quiet trembling of hearts that have found reflection in one another. They parted with no touch shared, and yet it might as well have been the most intimate embrace. For what is more intimate than truth unveiled? Don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. Lady Whistledown here, though I shall not linger on introductions. Some chapters in this tale require no embellishment, for the darkest hours need only truth to strike their blow. Word travels quickly in great houses, even when spoken in whispers softer than the brush of silk. The steward, Mr. Halden, received his summons from the Duke in the late morning. A neat message bearing the seal of Fallowbrook, requesting his presence in the study. Nothing more. Nothing less. Yet by the time the ink dried, the halls were already busy with murmurs, the sort that slither beneath doors and cling to shadows. Someone had spoken, or perhaps no one needed to. Guilt has a way of hearing footsteps that have not yet begun to walk. Halden's hand trembled when he folded the note. He knew. The ledgers he had altered, the funds he had redirected, the careful manipulation of accounts, years of deceit were unravelling. And Helena, whose calm diligence had been mistaken for meekness, had become the thread puller. It is a terrible thing to be discovered by a woman who refuses to raise her voice. He moved not toward the study, but toward the servants' passage, where his coat hung and his coin purse waited. His pace quickened, footfalls uneven, heart pounding like a trapped bird. The corridors of Fallowbrook, usually still, seemed to narrow around him. He knew the Duke would not react with fury. No, Oliver's punishments would be measured, legal and irrevocably final. That was what frightened him most. Better a man who shouts than a man who judges. But haste is a dangerous companion, and the person he encountered as he turned the corner of the West Gallery was not guard, nor servant, nor Duke. It was Helena. She carried a tray then, tea for Lady Clarion, who had taken to sitting near the window in quiet contemplation. Helena had grown accustomed to these hallways, though the manor had grown quieter in recent days. The air had changed. The unspoken tension between Helena and Oliver, tender, precarious and unnamed, had cast the household in a hush. Halden froze. Helena's eyes widened, not in fear but recognition. She knew. The truth lay visible between them. "Mr. Holden," she said softly, "the Duke has requested your presence." Her kindness was the last thread holding together his crumbling composure. "Stay back," he hissed. His hand darted, not for a weapon, but for the tray. Porcelain shattered, tea splashed like blood across stone. Helena stumbled, caught herself on a pillar, but Holden lunged forward, desperate to push past her, desperate to flee before judgment found him. He did not intend harm. But cornered men are ruled not by intention. In that instant, before Helena could call out, a voice cut through the corridor, sharp as winter wind. "Enough." Oliver did not shout. He did not rush. Yet in 3 strides he was upon them, hand gripping Holden's coat, stopping him mid-motion. The steward sagged under the force of it, not pain, but resignation. His face crumpled. "My lord, please." "You will not touch her." Oliver's voice held no anger, it held finality. Holden's breath collapsed. He was escorted away by guards who seemed to appear from nowhere. Helena stood frozen, hand still braced against the cold stone, tea cooling around her feet. And Oliver looked at her as if seeing injury where none had yet formed. "Are you hurt?" His voice, usually so controlled, bore the faintest tremor. Helena shook her head. "No, I am well." But the moment did not end with relief. For the truth she had uncovered, the betrayal she had exposed, the protection he had now offered, these should have drawn them closer. Instead, they drove her away. For in that instant, Helena saw herself as the bargain she had been. An exchange. A solution to a problem. A payment. A sacrifice made quietly in service of those she loved. And the realization, though wrong, though born of wounded heart rather than fact, struck her with deep and unrelenting force. "I should not have stayed," she whispered, though she had not meant to speak aloud. Oliver's brow tightened. "Helena, I came here because I had no choice," she continued, voice still soft, but each word carving itself with quiet finality. "And though I do not regret helping Lady Clarion, I cannot remain in a place where my presence was gained through debt." Her meaning was clear. If she had been chosen freely, she might have stayed, but she had not. Oliver stepped toward her, something unguarded flickering in his eyes. Not command, not pride, something dangerously close to pleading. "You were never—" His voice caught. "You are not here as payment." But Helena had already stepped back, the distance between them colder than any winter wind. Silence spread. Not sharp, not violent, just heavy. Later, the manor would speak of how the Duke walked the corridors alone that evening, his footsteps echoing against high ceilings. Lady Clarion did not speak a word, but her gaze followed Helena with a knowing sadness. Servants who gossip about everything spoke in hushed tones, not out of decorum but reverence, as though something solemn and fragile had shattered before them. Helena packed what little she had brought. No farewell speeches, no dramatic tears. The house had grown too quiet for such noise. Clarion watched her go, eyes wide and shining but silent still. Helena pressed a kiss to her forehead, light, lovely, aching. She left her room. The hall stretched long. No one stopped her. But Oliver stood at the main entrance, hands clasped behind him, posture carved from grief he had no practice revealing. Neither spoke. Because words require courage, and courage had abandoned them both. Helena walked past him. The great doors opened. Winter air rushed in. The manor closed behind her. And so I must write what London already knows in its bones. The ton adores tragedy, so long as it is not their own. There are moments in a story when pride falls silent, when titles lose their weight, when lineage and legacy bend before something far greater. This is such a moment. For after Helena's departure, Fallowbrook Manor did not merely grow quiet, it hollowed. Oliver walked its corridors as though they no longer belonged to him. Rooms once merely cold now seemed cavernous. The silence was no longer Clarion's alone. It had seeped into the very bones of the estate. Servants spoke softly, not out of respect, but in mourning for a warmth that had, briefly, impossibly, begun to grow. Lady Clarion sat by her window with her hands folded in her lap, gaze distant, her silence heavier than it had ever been. Even the great hearths, no matter how fiercely they burned, could not banish the chill. Oliver tried to occupy himself with the responsibilities of his title. Documents arranged neatly before him blurred into meaningless rows of ink. His steward's crimes were being addressed, reparations calculated, legal proceedings prepared. Matters of grave importance, yet all hollow. A duke may command estates, economies and armies, but the heart is no obedient servant. At dusk on the third day, Oliver found himself in the music room. It had not been used in years. Dust lay undisturbed upon the pianoforte. He remembered the last time music had filled the room, the laughter of a woman who had not loved him, and the quiet humiliation that followed. He had sworn never to feel such vulnerability again, and yet here he was, broken not by betrayal, but by the departure of a woman who had never once pretended. He sat heavily at the edge of the seat, though he did not play. The room smelled of old pine and fading memories. His hands did not tremble, but they felt strange, useless, restless. He remembered Helena's voice, low and warm, steady even in moments of fear. He remembered the way she sat beside Clarion, her presence soft enough to soothe yet strong enough to root. He remembered how she looked at him, not as duke, nor master, nor saviour, but as a man. He rose suddenly, as though breathing had become impossible indoors. His footsteps echoed through the halls, down the grand stairs, across the entrance chamber. A footman stood ready to announce orders, but no instruction came. Oliver stepped past him. No carriage was prepared, no escort arranged, no announcement made. He left through the front gates on foot, cloak snapping in the bitter wind. Snow bent the branches low, and the sky carried the colour of slate. He walked, past the iron gates, past the manicured outer grounds, onto the long road that wound its way toward Briarwood. The journey was not short, nor gentle. Mud collected on his boots. Cold gnawed at his gloved hands. But Oliver did not feel it. Determination has a way of burning hotter than any fire. Villagers saw him first as a distant shape, then as something far more shocking. The Duke of Fallowbrook with no escort, no coat of arms, no announcement of presence, just a man with tired shoulders and a gaze fixed forward. Some bowed, some whispered, some only stared. But Oliver did not stop for them. Helena was in the small garden behind the manor, kneeling in the snow as she clipped the last of the winter herbs, coaxing from the frozen earth what life she could. Her siblings watched from the window. Her mother rested by the hearth. Briarwood was worn but alive, held together not by wealth, but by care. Helena did not hear him approach, not until his shadow fell across the snow before her. She rose slowly. Her hands were bare and cold. There was earth beneath her nails. A smudge of frost kissed her cheek. She had never looked more like herself. Oliver drew a breath, but words, once so carefully chosen, so tightly controlled, did not come. Not at first. For he did not know how one begins to speak when speaking means undoing a lifetime of armour. Helena broke the silence. "You should not have come." Her voice was steady, tired, not angry, simply resigned. "I know," Oliver said. The admission held no grandeur, no command, no power, only truth. Helena looked away, toward the fields that stretched outward in thin winter lines. "Your world and mine are not the same. I was there because of necessity, and now necessity has passed." "No," Oliver said, and the word held more depth than protest. "You were there because I allowed myself to believe I required nothing, because I mistook distance for safety, because I feared the cost of needing someone." Helena's breath caught, but she did not turn. He stepped closer, not close enough to touch, but close enough to be heard without strain. "You were never payment," he said quietly. "You were never obligation. Not to her, not to the manor, not to me." Helena's eyes lifted, just enough to meet his. "That is not how it felt," she whispered. "Yes," Oliver replied, voice low, "and that is the fault I must carry." The wind moved between them, stirring Helena's hair. Snowflakes clung to his shoulders like pale ash. "I cannot offer you grandeur," Oliver continued, "nor promises of ease. I have spent so long closing every door that I no longer know how to open them, but I can offer you truth." Helena's brows knit, not in confusion but in fragile, aching recognition. Oliver's chest rose and fell. "I love you." The words were simple, unadorned, earnest in the way only a man stripped of all defences can be. Helena closed her eyes. The world did not shift, it simply settled. Oliver did not step forward. He did not touch her hands. He did not attempt to claim what had not yet been returned. He simply stood, as a man stands before judgment. No title, no estate, no armour, only a heart, held out with trembling resolve. And Helena, she did not answer. Not yet. For love, when genuine, requires not only courage to speak, but courage to accept. But for the first time since her departure, she did not turn away. And that, my readers, is how redemption begins. Not in grand declarations, not in sweeping gestures, but in the quiet choice to stay. I shall step lightly, for what occurred next needs no embroidery from my ink. It was not whispered behind fans, nor traded in drawing-room shadows. No, the truth of it unfolded beneath open sky, with every living soul in Briarwood present to bear witness. The sun was barely up when the church bell began its slow toll, not in mourning nor in celebration, but in summons. The villagers came, farmers with earth still under their nails, mothers with shawls wrapped high against the wind, children clutching one another by the sleeves. They gathered in the square, drawn by the knowledge that something was about to change, something no rumour could contain. Helena stood among them, not in finery nor in fear. Her hands were clasped before her, steady, though her heart beat as though remembering both wound and wonder. She did not seek a place at the front, nor did she hide at the back. She stood where she had always existed, among her own. Then the Duke stepped forward, not from horseback, not flanked by guards, not armoured in title. Oliver walked into the square as a man, no more, and certainly no less. The villagers parted, but not out of reverence, out of awe. The man before them was not the cold, distant figure they had heard tales of. His shoulders bore the weight of regret and resolve alike. His steps held the gravity of a choice long delayed, now made. He stopped before Helena, not the village, her. The world did not fall silent. It simply listened. "Helena," he began, his voice carrying not through command but through clarity. "When you stood before me in Fallowbrook and begged for mercy, I believed myself above the reach of feeling, above need, above attachment. I thought distance was strength, that duty required a heart of stone." He drew a breath that shuddered. I was wrong. The villagers watched. Not one moved, not one dared speak. "I did not understand then what I understand now," he continued. "You were not asking for charity, you were offering trust, and I repaid it with a bargain that should never have been asked of you." Helena's gaze softened, but she did not step toward him. This was not a moment to interrupt. Oliver glanced once at the villagers, not to seek approval, but acknowledgement. "I come before you not to justify what has passed," he said, "but to amend it. I do not ask Helena to return to Fallowbrook by obligation. I do not ask her to serve my household. I do not ask her to sacrifice herself in quiet for others' comfort." His next words came not like a rehearsed speech, but like truth finally spoken aloud after being held too long in silence. "I ask for her companionship, not as debt, not as service, but as equal, as partner, as heart to mine." Gasps rippled, not sharp gossiping sounds, but reverent disbelief. Oliver stepped closer then, not to claim, but to offer, "If you refuse me," he said softly to Helena, "I will not return to Fallowbrook unchanged. I will return a man who learned what it means to feel and what it means to value the one who taught him. You owe me nothing." It was Helena's turn to breathe slowly, evenly, as though collecting the pieces of her heart and deciding what shape they might now form. She looked at him, not as Duke, not as the man who once held power over her choices, but simply as Oliver. "Do you understand?" she murmured, her voice quiet but carrying. "How deeply I feared that what I felt was only gratitude, that I had been placed in your world not by love but by need. I understand," he said, "and I would spend my life proving it untrue." The wind lifted the edge of Helena's braid. A few strands caught the light like threads of gold. And in that single still moment every witness saw the answer forming long before it was spoken. "I forgive you," she said. Not a whisper, not a triumph, a release. Oliver closed his eyes, not in relief but in humbled reverence. "But forgiveness," Helena continued, "is not the same as return. Love must be chosen willingly." She paused, and then, quietly, beautifully, "And I choose you." The sound that rose from the crowd was not applause. It was breath returning after being held for far too long. Oliver reached for her hand, not as noble to commoner, nor saviour to saved, as man to woman, as soul to soul, their fingers intertwined, not trembling, not hesitant, certain. One does not need a kiss for a union to be sealed. There are touches that carry more meaning than lips could ever convey. Hands interlocked beneath the witnessing sky have bound lovers together, since long before vows were written. The villagers stood witness to something rare, love not born of convenience, nor secured by dowry, nor orchestrated by mothers eager for status. It was love that survived misunderstanding, distance, silence, pride, and fear. Love not tamed, but accepted. Some would later say the Duke married beneath him. Others would say Helena rose above her station. But those who understood whispered a different truth. They met in the middle. Scandal did not fade. It transformed. And that is how legends begin. Not in ballrooms, but in village squares, where titles fall away, and two hands find each other, as equals. My ink gentled to a sigh, for serenity requires only witness. Morning sunlight keeps honest hours at Fallowbrook. It arrives pale, then abounds, sliding across stone and timber. It polishes the banister Helena touches on her descent and lingers where a kettle hums. The house wakes without hurry. Fires are built, bread sliced. Helena brings no parade, only presence. She straightens a picture, mends a cuff, warms a teacup before passing it to a maid with cold fingers. Posies appear where severity once camped. Rosemary by the east window, violets near the entry bell, sweet peas in the study. She learns names and remembers them. She asks after fathers at sea, lambing seasons, ribbon colours. The change she makes is not to marble but to air. Rooms that once held breath now exhale. Lady Clarion's mornings belong to sunlit ritual. Helena reads beside her, voice a steady current. Clarion's hands, quiet for so long, have grown companionable. They pass a comb, arrange ribbons by mood, set a shawl more snugly if a draught intrudes. She has not spoken. Words have not yet returned, yet her contentment stands. She smiles when Helena mispronounces a French phrase on purpose, laughs, silent but bright, when a page reveals its secret. Oliver crosses thresholds softly, not to hide, but to honour. In doorways he lingers with a book he forgets to open, learning the cadence of ordinary grace, paper turning, kettle sighing, a hound arranging itself near Helena's skirt. When Clarion rests her head against Helena's arm, he does not intervene. His eyes give thanks and learn restraint. Then, like a reluctant instrument remembering music, a sound escapes him. Warm. He laughs. It is not elegant or practiced. It is the unarmoured truth of a man who has found something he cannot command and does not wish to. The staff do not startle. A footman's mouth tilts. The housekeeper discovers dust. A scullery maid stands taller for having heard it. Later, he laughs again at a flower ghost on Helena's wrist and at Clarion's conspiratorial cheating at drafts. The manor learns new habits. Doors close without bang. Counsel arrives without edge. The physician who promised miracles through intimidation is thanked and uninvited. Windows open to admit birdsong even when the air is sharp. The music room breathes. Helena coaxes a melody from the pianoforte that stumbles and grins. Oliver follows worse and delighted, and Clarion presses a single key as if conferring a blessing. When wrong notes crowd, they laugh and let the right ones wait. There are days when sorrow returns like weather. Clarion's silence thickens. Memories step from old corridors. Bills arrive with their chill arithmetic. Oliver pauses in a doorway, winter gathering at his shoulders. But constancy holds. Soup appears. Shawls find laps. A letter is posted with steadying news. A walk proposed at the moment air is needed. Only care, repeated until it becomes fact. In the study, civilization has triumphed over ceremony. The Duke's desk is orderly and welcoming. Tenant accounts awaiting Helena's eye, a list in her hand noting oil for lamps, salt for roads, a basket to the widow on the hill, a paperweight lark migrating between papers. When Helena enters with cottage news, Oliver turns his chair because attention now follows affection. They discuss Pete, a failing roof, a tutor who confuses sternness with skill. Decisions are made and carried. Walks on the south lawn have become scripture. Breath leaves them in pale banners while the dogs practice a liturgy of joy. Clarion loops her arm through Helena's and pockets the reddest leaves, one she presses into Oliver's hand with ceremony. He tucks it into his coat like contraband happiness. No one comments. Reverence speaks better in quiet. By noon, the bell answers a household. Clarion's drawings accumulate, boats, trees, all the ways a sun can be drawn, and Helena rotates them like constellations. The kitchen rediscovers the scandal of cinnamon. A maid hums a tune Helena misplayed that morning. The notes are improved and still loyal to the spirit. By evening, rooms keep their light after the sun yields. Helena writes a list. Ham for Mrs. Pike, wool for the shepherd's youngest, oranges when the cart comes from town. Oliver reads over her shoulder and adds, candles for the church, and lower, a new shawl, for when the wind forgets its manners. She pretends not to see and wears it the next day. Clarion has discovered a throne, a thick cushion by the hearth the size of the patient hound. She leans against Helena's knee while the comb glides. No words, not yet. But affection is fluent. Clarion lifts Helena's hand to her cheek in thanks. Helena smiles and continues reading. Oliver, from the opposite chair, laughs softly at nothing at all, which is to say at everything being exactly as it is. Morning in this new order is a benediction. The sun finds the banister. Helena's footfall answers. Clarion's slippers whisper behind. Oliver opens a window as if drawing breath for the entire house. The kettle obliges. The dogs apologize to the rug and are absolved. The clock, once a judge, becomes a chorister. There is work, but it is not penance. It is belonging. Accuracy compels me to note, the house is no longer silent, nor is the heart of the Duke. Where once stone borrowed his cold, now he borrows Helena's warmth, she who tends fires and futures with the same patient hand. Laughter travels the corridor without escort. It is recognized and admitted. A final image, because endings prefer pictures. Frost melting from the terrace as the sun climbs. Helena tipping her face to light. Clarion setting a posy in a glass and arranging its shadow. Oliver at the threshold, watching the two souls who taught him that a home is not a fortress, but a promise kept each morning. He laughs, softly, surprised to hear himself. Tell me, do you believe even the coldest heart may bloom under love's touch? Whisper your thoughts below. We've come to the end of this gossip. Subscribe and stay with us for the next love that London whispers about.